In this lesson, we're going to be talking about basic tennis spin types, which will include topspin, backspin, and flat. Flat essentially means no spin. The first one we're going to cover is topspin. And in the graphic over here, our red arrows represent the ball's spin, where our blue line here, blue arrow, represents the ball's movement toward the other side of the court, just to kind of give a general direction of where the ball is headed. So how does topspin affect the ball's movement? So this forward rotation here causes the ball to quickly dip down toward the court. How does topspin affect the ball's bounce? Well, that really depends on which court type you're playing on. So on regular hard courts and clay courts, the ball is going to kick up higher than normal. On grass courts and multi-purpose courts are essentially rubber, the ball is going to skid and bounce forward, kind of out, instead of bouncing up higher. So a little bit of a difference between court types there. So when should topspin be used during a match? So topspin strokes work really well when you want to hit hard with a big margin for error, because that ball is going to dip down. It can work well when you want to push an opponent back, because the ball can kick up or out. It can make it hard for an opponent to move closer. It works well when you want to get the ball out of an opponent's strike zone. So this especially works well with shorter players. When you're playing a shorter player, you can kick it up higher than they're comfortable with. So it works well there. And this can also be effective when you have an opponent come right up to the net and you want to hit a lob over the top of them. That topspin will help you keep the ball in the court. All right, next one we're going to look at is backspin or slice. So something to know about backspin is that in tennis it's really hard to hit pure backspin. Generally, when we are talking about backspin, we're talking about slice, which is a whole lot of backspin, a little bit of side spin. So just keep that in mind. In our diagram here, we can see the ball is now kind of spinning backwards, again with a little side spin, while the ball's direction is still moving toward the other side of the court. So how does slice affect the ball's movement? Well, the ball's backward and sideways rotation is going to make it kind of stay lower through the air than the other types of spin, and it's going to arc a little bit to one side depending on if you are a right-hander or a left-hander, and if you're hitting on your forehand or backhand side. How does slice affect the ball's bounce? So regardless of court type, if you hit a slice, the ball is going to bounce low and it's going to go slightly to one side. If you really aggressively cut a slice, then it could move pretty significantly to the side, but that's, that can vary from player to player. The ball is generally not going to go as far after the bounce compared to the other spin types that we've talked about and we will talk about. It's going to stay low and not travel very far. Okay. When should it be used during a match? Well, backspin, slice strokes, they can be effective when you want to disrupt an opponent's rhythm. Some players get really used to one speed, and if you throw in a slice, that can kind of throw them off their game. It can work well if you want to force an opponent to move forward. Maybe you want them to come up to the net. Hitting that slice can make them run up because that ball is not going to travel very far. This is kind of the point number 3 is similar to what we talked about in when we were talking about topspin. Slice can be used to get the ball out of an opponent's strike zone, except this time in the opposite direction. So instead of kicking the ball up too high, we're going to keep that ball nice and low. This works really well against taller players because it makes them bend down. So another good way to just keep that ball away from an opponent's ideal hitting zone. And slice can also be really effective to prevent an opponent from attacking. Keeping that ball low and slow might make it hard for you to hit a winning shot, but it makes it really hard for your opponent to generate a lot of speed off it if it's coming in super slow. So if you are a defensive-minded player, then the slice can be really, really effective. All right, the last spin type we're going to talk about is flat strokes, or essentially no spin. So you can see in our diagram here, the ball is essentially moving forward with almost no spin. So a flat shot has, again, essentially no spin, so it's going to travel in a relatively straight line toward the other side of the court. The difference is these, if you hit a shot with no spin, or really limited spin, it's going to get to the other side of the court more quickly. It's not traveling in an arc like some of the other spins we've talked about. So how does that affect the ball's bounce? Well, the ball's generally not going to kick to either side, and it's gonna, in terms of height, it's going to be somewhere between a topspin shot and a slice or backspin shot. When should this be used? Well, flat shots can be really effective when you want to take away time from an opponent. Topspin shots, they have that higher arc and they kick up, so they take a little bit longer to get to the other side of the court. Slice shots have a little bit lower arc, but they're also a relatively slow shot. Flat strokes travel in a perfectly straight line, essentially, which means your opponent is going to have less time to react. So it can be very, very effective when you want to reduce an opponent's reaction time. Flat strokes are also really effective when you want to neutralize an opponent's spin. So if an opponent is hitting lots of topspin or hitting lots of backspin, hitting a neutral shot will kind of reduce the effect of your opponent's spin. It'll come back with, it'll be a little bit easier to control and keep you in the point a little bit longer. The last one is neutralizing an opponent's power, and this is something that's used off the return of serve quite often. So an opponent's hitting really hard. If you try to spin the ball either way, it might you might run into some trouble, hit the frame of your racket because hitting that spin requires a little bit of wrist movement. If you hit that flat stroke, again, you get a lot more control and you can hit a bigger part of your racket. So overall, flat shots are really great at neutralizing opponent's spin and power, and can also be used to take away time from an opponent. So all three of these will be discussed in more detail later, and all three of these are going to be really, really useful when we talk about more advanced tactics. So I hope you found that helpful.